Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. We have a new update on speakers at the Antinatalist conference which is happening on 29th and 30th of November. Last week we saw David Benatar was announced as a speaker at the conference who will be talking about antinatalism and our duties to do good. This week, the second speaker was announced, Rivka Weinberg. She will be talking against altruism, which sounds a little contradictory to the compassionate stance that most antinatalists would take. And that's why it is also interesting. Rivka is an American philosopher and professor of philosophy at Scripps College in California. Her website, rivkaweinberg.com, says Rivka is a philosopher specializing in ethical and metaphysical questions regarding procreation, death, and meaning. And she is also known for lack of good cheer and an abundance of great shoes. In her book, The Risk of a Lifetime: How, When, and Why Procreation May Be Permissible, published in 2016, Rivka evaluated the choice made by the individual agent, that is, the potential parent, to bring a new child into existence. She also has an upcoming book, The Meaning of It All: Ultimate Meaning, Everyday Meaning, Cosmic Meaning, Death, and Time, which is scheduled to be published on 16th June 2026. Among other things, she argues in the book for making the most meaning out of our time by engaging with everyday meaning, accepting suffering, and paying attention. Now, I know that Rivka has in the past questioned David Benatar's concept of cosmic meaning as something necessary for us to procreate. She is not what I would call a full fledged antinatalist either, but thinks that procreation is morally permissible in far fewer cases than what happens in the real world. And on the website of Scripps College, where she teaches, I found this. Nobody asks to exist, and life is very risky. Rivka says, I think if I was asked before I was born if I would agree on this, I would say no. Still, she eventually decided to have children, willing to gamble on the odds that they would have good lives. So, we already see the diversity in opinions that we are going to get at the conference, which is even more exciting. Bree Lee, or Bry Lee, is an Australian journalist who wrote an article for ABC News in Australia about antinatalism, the case against babies. From Bree Lee's Instagram post, we come to know that this article has been viewed by over 150,000 people. It is a good back and forth between opposing positions. There are quotes from Anastasia Berg on the one hand and David Benatar from the antinatalist side. Anastasia Berg is the co-author of a book called What Are Children For? On Ambivalence and Choice, along with Rachel Weissman. Bree is clear on the distinction between antinatalism and child-free positions. It is important that antinatalism is not conflated with the child-free movement and the rise in maternal ambivalence. Both of those are important, but they still usually focus on whether or not people want to have kids. An antinatalist is asking something different. Regardless of what we want, should we? Philanthropic arguments, mainly only the consent argument, is talked about in the article, and misanthropic arguments are covered to some extent. She also talks about the environmental flavors of philanthropic and misanthropic arguments. In that, people don't want to bring a child into a world affected by climate change because that child will suffer. And they also don't want to create another consumer who will contribute to this man made climate change. Even Benatar recognizes ecological antinatalism when he says there is now an active antinatalist movement which has also been boosted by the environmental crisis. Note that he thinks antinatalism as a whole is taking the form of a movement. It's not a precise observation, but still something we should welcome. That said, he is clear about procreative freedom and reproductive rights. He does not want to stop people from having children when he says, I don't want to stop you from becoming a parent. I want you to stop becoming parents. Meaning, he wants to convince people not to have children rather than forcing them in any way. We hear about demographic collapse, economy, population pyramids, aging populations, low fertility rates, and so on. But these are considering the interests of existing people. We are not thinking about the new person we want to create as a solution to these problems. And so Benatar describes the pro-natalist policies as a procreational Ponzi scheme. He says new people are just created to protect existing people. As with all Ponzi schemes, this one will eventually go bust because the human species will eventually come to an end. One is only delaying the problem, not preventing it by employing pronatalist policies. Anastasia Berg's quotes seemed less plausible to me. For example, on the problem that we are exposing our children to the suffering of life without their consent, Berg says, what we are responsible for as parents is not the sum of our children's well being, but preparing our children to meet life's challenges, disappointments, and temptations as best as we can. That to me seemed like a cop out. How do you draw the line on what you're responsible for? You created that child to start with. Anyway, Bree Lee, the author of this article, is also a novelist. Her latest novel, Seed, is based on a character called Mitchell, who is a biologist and an antinatalist. So, we have a novel with the main character as an antinatalist. This is exciting news. The novel will be published on 30th September 2 days from now. You can also listen to 5 minutes of a free preview part of the book where you will know that the title of the book, Seed, refers to regular plant seeds, but it also refers to human semen. If you want to read more about the novel, then artshub.com has a full review of the novel and its story. This is where we know that the main character, Mitchell, is a celebrated biologist and co founder of Antinatalism Australia Journal. And here's a video where she herself talks about the book.
Hi, I'm Bree Lee, and this is my new book, Seed. It's about two scientists who are setting up a seed vault in a secret location in Antarctica. The main character, Mitch, has dedicated his whole life to fighting the climate emergency, and as a result, he has some pretty hectic and controversial ideas about family planning. But then when their helicopter doesn't pick them up and the radios go down, Mitchell and his colleague Francis have to deal with secrets that they have been keeping from themselves and from each other, and they have to reckon with the lives that they have made for themselves. Seed comes out on September 30. I hope you enjoy it.
G'day, I'm actor and author Luke Arnold, and I am also the narrator of Seed, an amazing new novel from acclaimed and best-selling author Bree Lee. Seed takes listeners to a secret location in Antarctica, where biologist Mitchell and his colleague Francis spend 1 month each year tending to a seed vault known as the Anarctos Project. But when strange things start happening, suddenly their faith in science isn't enough. Listen to the audiobook of Seed on the 30th of September, wherever you get your audiobooks.
Bree Lee is also doing a book tour in cities in Australia on the dates on the screen. On the publisher's website, there are links to booking for these events. The prices may vary by city, but you can also take a friend and comment on her Instagram post for an entry to a lottery for an early copy that they're giving away. From book tour to street activism, Antinatalism Japan had their outreach on 22nd in Tokyo. On your screen are the signs they use. Their website says this event was blessed with positive reactions from pedestrians, one of them showing their complete agreement with our view, one interested in the consent argument and asking a question, and several others indicating their approval by gesture. And from Japan to Germany, there's an outreach event organized in Leipzig today. The post says, our first antinatalism event as a local group in Leipzig. We invite you to join us for some engaging conversations. So these antinatalist events are popping up everywhere really. Since this particular one is today, I don't have any photos yet, but we'll see next time if I get any. A doctoral thesis, Antinatalist Ethics and Their Broader Moral Significance by Connor Leake was published recently at the University of Birmingham. Its main idea is to explore other areas of moral significance through an antinatalist lens. Areas like the value of death, the environment, food ethics, veganism, and extinction. It's 273 pages long, and I haven't read it all, but it starts with Bennett's antinatalism and then moves on to pro-mortalism, including deprivation account and annihilation. It also looks at the subjective evaluation of death, environmental attitudes through an antinatalist perspective, the harm principle and its implications like ethical veganism and the case against procreation, and finally extinction and its connection to antinatalism. From Birmingham to Singapore, Independent Singapore had a piece about child-free women. Why are fewer Singaporeans choosing to have children these days? A woman asks child-free married folks if you regret not having them. Even though this was about child-free women, there was a section on antinatalism talking about suffering and the consent argument. Now, on to some notable antinatalist videos. But just a note before we start. Antinatalism videos are rapidly rising in many different languages and from many different countries and backgrounds. But this is the list which I could take time out to watch, so it is not an exhaustive list by any means. There's a channel called Bracer Jack with 58,000 subscribers, and they made a video of an imaginary courtroom drama where a baby is suing its parents for birthing it without its consent. It's an AI generated video, but the script is compelling and to the point. Conundrum has done a video on the soothing whiff of pessimism. His main point is future disaster will eventually happen. And this goes both on an individual level as well as on a societal level. If I don't die of a heart attack, I could be killed by someone or I might get a stroke and so on. Similarly, if it is not climate change, then it could be nuclear war or some super bug, etc. So as the title suggests, this is on pessimism and not on antinatalism, but still, it's a fantastic video and I hope Conundrum makes more of such videos. Chal Baat Kar is a Hindi channel. The title means let's talk. He has made a video on antinatalism in Hindi. He quickly skims through empirical asymmetry, Bennett's axiological asymmetry, and then moves on to practical aspects like population, poverty, etc. One mistake he makes is he uses Peter Singer's photo as David Benatar, not an uncommon mistake to make. And although what he says is not exactly accurate, I'm still glad that people are making content on this topic. Maddie Coco did another sequel of his thought experiments. Last week, we saw him asking ChatGPT about hypothetical scenarios leading towards antinatalism, mainly using consent and risk argument. This time, he's doing the same but with natural intelligence instead of artificial one. Meaning, he has interviewed some fellow humans asking about the same scenarios in which they would either bring or not bring a new human being into existence. He seems to have planned and thought this through, so very good work. Now, on to a big one. There's a Marathi channel called Amuk Tamuk. Marathi, by the way, is a language spoken by millions in India. This Amuk Tamuk channel has more than 600,000 subscribers and they released a podcast talking about DINK, that is double income no kids lifestyle. Now, of course, the focus was mainly on child free lifestyle and on potential parents rather than the child that is going to come into existence. But there were a few good points to note. One, the guests were Dr. Shrisha Sathe, who is a professional psychologist with 25 years of experience, and Nandita Ambike, who is chairperson of the Child Welfare Committee for Pune district in India. So they know what they're talking about, and their stance is not coming from a dislike toward children. Two, they debunk the dichotomy which is presented in society globally that those who have children are doing something virtuous and those who don't are just indulgent hedonists enjoying superficial pleasures of life. 3. They rightly criticize the pronatal bias that still exists in our societies and how young people, especially women, are pressured to have children. 4. They point out the over the top glorification of motherhood that goes on. And 5. This, I think, is a big one. This was a bombshell coming from a woman psychologist, Dr. Shisha Sathe, squarely denies there being an instinct for having children. She says there is no such thing as a biological clock or maternal instinct. That is a story constructed by society so that people keep on having children. We only have an instinct for having sex, not for having children, which I thought was amazing.